In this lesson, we're going to be talking about protecting your wireless setup against attack. So how would you go about protecting your wireless networks? Well, there's a few different ways of protecting your wireless networks, and I've got the configuration up for an access point here, and I'm going to talk you through some different things that you can do that would protect your access point or your wireless network. So we're going to skim by turn wireless on because we're going to assume that wireless is on. I can change the SSID, and one thing that you may do to change the SSID is to give your wireless network a name that's maybe not so obvious as to what it is or what business or enterprise it belongs to. You could set it to a string of random numbers and digits and hope that somebody doesn't figure out that it's something of interest. Of course, if you've got a particular curious mind like me and several other people who do this type of work, then that's just going to be a red flag for somebody and say, look, this is something that looks a little odd, and so maybe we should go take a look at what it is. So there's a bit of a juggling act here. Do you want to give away information about what it is and what it's for? Do you want to potentially call attention to it by giving it a completely random name, in which case it's going to stick out a little bit? So think a little bit about what you want to name your wireless network and what SSID that you're going to use. You can set different channels, although frankly, wireless scanners are going to be able to pick up all of the different channels that you've got or that are available through a particular subset of the 802.11 protocols. But you can definitely select channels, and some of this has to do with where there's interference and where there isn't interference. Sometimes if you're getting bad transmissions and slow speeds over your wireless, you can choose different channels and maybe get better performance. So one of the first things that you want to do, aside from what we've talked about, is make sure that you've got some sort of encryption turned on. In this case, I've got WEP turned off, and that's because where I'm located, there's nobody nearby. There's almost no chance of anybody coming anywhere near where this is transmitting to be able to see any of the data that's going across it. And so for ease of use here, I've just turned WEP off on this particular wireless network. If you do turn WEP on, you have the ability to set your wireless key. And you can set either hex or ASCII, and you've got an opportunity to set 64 40-bit key or 128 104-bit key. And the difference there is the key length, obviously, and the amount of characters that you have to type. I would strongly recommend going to a 128 104-bit key for your password. And that's for WEP, or the wired equivalent privacy. And again, you can choose hex or ASCII depending on how good you are at remembering things. You run the risk of, if you're going to do a long hex password, of needing to write it down somewhere, and that can be a bit of a challenge. Now I've got some advanced security settings over here, and I've got the ability to either turn on or turn off my SSID broadcast. So wireless networks typically by default will broadcast their SSIDs, and that makes it easy for users to connect to them because they see that there's a wireless network and they know that they need to connect to it. It's one less thing that they have to configure or type. And so turning on the SSID broadcast in most circumstances is probably a good idea. Again, it's an ease of use thing more than anything. If you're really paranoid and you're really security conscious, you can disable the SSID broadcast. That doesn't guarantee that you won't be seen, however. There is a possibility that wireless scanners will pick up your network even though you're not broadcasting the SSID. As a matter of fact, it's a pretty good chance that Wi-Fi scanners will pick up your network. Another thing that you can do to protect your network is basically put up some access policies. Now, this takes a lot of administrative overhead and there's a lot of work associated with it. But if you don't have a lot of users and you're really conscious about who you're going to allow to access your network, what you can do is require that the MAC addresses match what you've put in. So you can set MAC authentication. In other words, your layer 2 or physical address, your MAC address, has to be in a table of addresses on the access point before the access point will allow the communication between your device and itself. So that's another way of really restricting who gets access. And that's not even a measure of who has a username and password or who has the passphrase for the wireless network, which can be shared or overheard or read if it's written down. This comes down to, do you have the right piece of physical equipment to gain access to this network? And you either do or you don't. If you don't, game over. You don't get to go any further. You don't get to plug in the passphrase that you think you knew. You are just done. So that's a way of really locking down your wireless network. Again, though, as I said, that's a lot of administrative overhead. You've got to go find all of the physical addresses and plug them in. And anytime you want to add a device, then you need to add that MAC address. Anytime you've got a visitor of some sort or another that you want to give access to your wireless network, you've got to add the MAC address. So there's a lot of overhead to doing that. But these are all different ways that you can use to lock down your wireless network.